Welcome, everybody, to the Resistance broadcast. It's TRB Live. And I'm not going to say we're live, baby, or back, baby, because my daughter's been waking up a lot. And I didn't want to wake her up. So my apologies. You'll have to wait till next time. But you can't do it every time anyway, right? So thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Resistance broadcast. I'm John. With me, as always, is James and Lacey. And we are here to talk about the latest in Star Wars news, official comments that we can talk about, among other things. And we're also going to talk about the gallery, the Mandalorian Season 3 gallery. I assume we all did our homework. We all watched it, right?
Yes.
I did. I watched it yesterday.
Yes. Yeah, me too. Me too. We'll get to it, but very cool to see Phil Tippett and that he was involved. But we'll get into our favorite parts of that in a bit. Now, we're sure a lot of people are seeing Indiana Jones tonight. But if you are joining us live, first of all, thank you very, very much. The podcast will also be appearing on the podcast apps tomorrow morning, aka Friday.
With Indiana Jones?
So if you're listening to this, you already know that. But if you are joining us live, we have super chats available if you would like your comments featured on the show and us to react to that comment. Otherwise, enjoy the live chat. Have a good time because we have some fun stuff to talk about. But speaking of Indiana Jones, James and I have our spoiler review, which will be for Dial of Destiny, which will be hitting the channel and podcast apps also tomorrow. So a lot of TRB these past few days at 1 p.m. ish, as long as I'm able to get around to it. But I'm aiming for 1 p.m. East to get that out on audio and on the channel. And of course, if you need more TRB content, sign up for our Patreon for access to a lot of great additional episodes and content, including tonight after TRB Live. We're heading right to Patreon, right in the private area of the Resistance base where you need a certain key card to get in, aka just being a patron. And we're doing our live Q&A, and you can ask us anything. It doesn't have to be about Star Wars. We've had some crazy stories to tell over the past few years doing these Q&As. It's all good fun, and we have a lot of awesome stuff over on our Patreon. So if you're interested, patreon.com/resistance broadcast, $5 to sign up to start. And we have a bunch of different tiers and stuff like that. Before we get into anything, I don't know if you guys saw, Liam Neeson is back, but he's not back in Star Wars. He is making another one of those movies where he does something bad and then he has to figure out how to.
I know where this is going. Go ahead.
Not mess up what he did to his family. So he has to drive a car really fast so it doesn't explode, which sounds like the movie Speed, but this one's called Retribution. And I thought that the movie should be called Qui-Gon in 60 Seconds. Hey, John, you're on fire today. Oh, thanks, Gallery. Appreciate that. Not Disney.
Your daughter's
Gallery.
sleeping.
My peanut gallery in the back. Yeah. She probably woke up and laughed at that joke, if I know her well.
She did not.
Lacey, what do you think about that joke? Good?
John, I already got this lowdown on Twitter last night, so you didn't have to actually do it.
There you have it, folks.
People tagged me in it, so I knew it was coming.
Oh, okay. Well, what are you going to do? I know James liked it, so that's, 50-50. All right, here we go. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get after it right now with our segment, The Resistance Report.
It's the Resistance.
All right, lots of news to talk about this week, including one particular story that is sort of the title story that we're talking about tonight, which is Kathleen Kennedy explaining to Games Radar and Total Film about the purpose and choice of moving forward with Rey as a character, as well as the story purposes of going back 25,000 years in James Mangold's story, and how the two are sort of connected, which is an interesting kind of explanation of where we were, where we're going, all that stuff, and how Lucasfilm is moving forward in their storytelling for not just to cover like A, B, and C, but like saying like, no, we're moving forward with this thing, and here are all of the elements. This is the future of the Force. We're going to explain more about it. I think it opens up many doors to say, you know, are we gonna write that? Are we gonna get maybe some things with George Lucas the way he sort of saw it? You know, it's all interesting. But I'm going to start with John on this one. What are your thoughts on what she had to say and how all of these stories are connected?
I like hearing this because I think that vast level of connectivity is cool. Especially if it's, you know, not one of those things where it's like a retcon or let's twist this up to fit in here. Like we see a lot of times when they tell stories to wedge into certain gaps of the original trilogy. They're making these movies, you know, virtually at the same time as far as development goes, so they can all be on the same page, which is a lesson learned from, as we talk about the sequel trilogy, of that passing the baton and changing the stories a bit. I think one of the things I found most interesting that I think flies under the quote radar here is that Kathleen Kennedy said, because when I first read it, I took it as this was something George and I talked about when the merger happened. But no, she said this is something that George talked about when he brought me into Lucasfilm. So this was a long time ago. George was toying with the idea of exploring the origins of the Force, which means no Jedi. It's actually people discovering this magical, mystical thing and trying to figure out what it is. And just all those things I've heard about Mangold saying he wants to make his 10 Commandments and stuff. And, you know, off the heels of seeing a great job, in my opinion, that he did with shooting Indiana Jones and how that movie turned out, I'm very excited for that. And now knowing that what that movie's about will be involved with Rey's understanding of the Force and her attempt to rebuild the Jedi Order, I think is very thought-provoking, very interesting. The only thing that twists me up a bit is if that movie, which takes place, you know, on page 1 of the story of Star Wars, because it's the farthest back we're going.
Right.
I believe, as far as we understand it anyway, that the Rey movie's coming first. So we're going to have to sort of use Mangold's movie after the fact to apply to the Rey movie in a weird way, if that's how they're going to work out the schedule. But I still think that's the case. I think that Rey movie's coming first. So we'll be able to maybe get hints of what we're going to get in that Mangold movie by how the Force is thought about in the new Rey Skywalker movie, which will bring on pretty cool speculation. So I find this to be all very interesting. I hope both movies, you know, go through and are both made, because we know that's an issue sometimes. And we're going to talk about that. We're actually doing the State of Star Wars Summer Edition on Monday. So we'll talk about that at length. But I kind of dig this. So I'm curious to see what you guys think about it.
Yeah, Lacey, do you have any particular thoughts on how these movies are connected? Or do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that they're doing the Rey movie first, like John was alluding to? Or do you think that this actually points to telling us the origin and then taking the next step and showing us how Rey's accepting that origin?
I think we're definitely getting the Rey movie first. I think we talked about Mangold's comments last week, and he
Right, that
basically
he
said
might
it's
not even be
impossible
on.
to say where he is. So it's like, okay, you're talking about Swamp Thing and all these other things. So that means those are coming first in your life than this. My thoughts about Kathleen Kennedy's comments lately are like, they're all over the place. And like, this is another example of like, they're all over the place. I know people saw her at the Indiana Jones premiere in the UK with the director and Daisy Ridley, like chatting it up on a balcony, which is surprising that Daisy was there, but I'm assuming it's like, hey, it's convenient. They're all there at the same time to talk about things, which is great. But I don't know. My thought on this is that I don't know how these movies are going to connect together, and it's not my place to say, but hearing her talk about it, how it's like such a definitive thing that like, yeah, they're going to connect. How? Like, how is Rey going to go from everything that's happened to her and everything that's happened in the saga to then be like, yeah, I'm going to go back to that thing that happened before any of this even existed. Like, I'm going to connect there. So I guess like that's where my question is like, how are you connecting it outside of just being like, this is the Force? Unless she goes on a journey of like learning more about it, and then that's how it connects. Which is interesting to me because it does follow the kind of pattern we've seen with franchises where they make a certain movie and then they'll go back to like the prequel is the next step. So like we're seeing it with Hunger Games right now. Like they made Hunger Games and they were super successful. So they went back and did a prequel so that they wouldn't have to tell the story after Katniss. They tell it before Katniss even existed. And that happens a lot in franchises. They did it with Harry Potter as well.
They did it with Star Wars.
Well, yeah, yeah. But I see that as like George always had this story. It wasn't like, oh, let's consider what this.
Right.
Anyway. But I think the thing that's confusing me about her comments is like Rey has made a promise to Luke. I don't remember her making a promise to Luke. Am I going crazy? Did she make a promise? I thought he was just like, hey, you got to do this thing. And she was like, you're right, I do. But like, there wasn't like I promised to do this, Luke.
She said that Kylo let him down and she won't let him down.
Oh, is that the promise?
That's what I'm assuming is that like, if you teach me, the reason you're not teaching me is because you tried to teach him and he didn't finish and he, left or whatever, but I won't do that. I'm not him. That's the only thing I could think that would be.
I mean, that's a good point. Like, I didn't consider that because I immediately went to the Rise of Skywalker when they have that like kind of conversation. I was like, did I not see the same movie as Kathleen Kennedy? I was like, what promise did Rey make?
It was the third lesson.
Right. But if you're saying it that way, then like, yeah, sure. I guess that translates. But even then it's like, I didn't take that as like, I don't know. That's a weird, like, it works, but it kind of doesn't work. It was kind of like her kind of saying like, hey, train me, but then he didn't. So like the promise wasn't really fulfilled on his part. So how could she, it's weird. So this is why I go back to like kind of these comments from Kathleen Kennedy are like all over the place.
Yeah.
It's like 1 week we're getting one thing and the next week it's like, oh, it's all interconnected and it totally makes sense. And I'm like, I feel like you're pulling a George Lucas and just saying these things after the fact. That because it makes sense.
He famously has
changed his mind. I'm totally cool with people changing their mind about anything. Like, hey, if you feel differently about something, it's fine. But I feel like she on a regular basis will say things like so definitively that she's like, I've always said this. And you're like, no, you have not.
Yeah.
So
delete the pages.
So that's the one comment that like I really got hung up on. I was like, what promise did she make? Like, all I really got from those movies is that she was mad at Luke and then Luke was like, hey, just don't be so hard on yourself. And she was like, you're right, Luke. And then like, that was it. And then she was like, hey, I'm going to take your name. So I didn't know if there was like name related. I didn't.
What if he really wants to do this whole 10 Commandments thing? What if instead of like, stone tablets or whatever, like what if we see somebody on clean pages writing the ancient Jedi texts in that movie?
Well, yeah, so that's what I was sort of saying before.
Books
like,
survive 25,000 years. Maybe in Star Wars they can.
Yes, and the other part of this that I was really concerned about, and I don't mean to put James on the spot because that's not my intention, but when we had the Rey conversation a couple weeks ago, James was talking about how like he hopes Rey is a full Jedi and like does her thing, and like we get to see how the Jedi are supposed to be, and then I'm like, I don't think that's how that's supposed to be. Like I think Rey should have a family, all these things. Now these comments, I think part of this too was me being like, are they really going to make her like a solo Jedi, like sad person again? Like,
no way. No.
Like, what are we doing here? Because that's what I kind of got from those things. Like, oh, she made a promise to Luke and she's going to follow through and be like the Jedi for Luke. And I'm like, have we learned nothing? Have we learned nothing from the Jedi? We're really going to default back to like, and that's what I gathered from these comments. I might be totally reading it wrong and I do it all the time, but I immediately thought of that and I was like, no.
I think that the way they're doing it, if they do the Rey story first and then they go back and tell the origins, I think that's fine because they're going to usher in sort of her new way of doing things that we're maybe unfamiliar with as far as like what we've seen from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And then sort of go back and tell us like how like what she's doing makes sense. Like they're doubling down on that thing. The only part that doesn't really connect to me, because that system does make sense to me. She says she's got these books, Yoda says she's got everything she needs. So she's got the books, she's going to go through that stuff and she's going to try to deep dive the Jedi in the ways that Luke did. Whereas I think Luke looked at a lot of their faults and said, this has to end. I think she'll probably, to your point, is she'll probably look at it and say, well, these are the things that need to change. But when you go back and say, like, how did they get there? I think there is that little bit of discrepancy that Mangold has talked about where it's like, this is the origins of the Force, not necessarily the origins of the Jedi.
Right.
So that doesn't necessarily match with what Kathleen is saying. But I do think that if they say make that movie, I think Star Wars, I mean, anything like this, like they did it with Solo, they're going to do it with just about anything. If it's a hit, they want to keep telling those stories. So they go back, they tell the origins of the Force. If it is what it is, it is what it is, right? They're going to just leave it at that movie. But if it's a big hit, people want to see more of it, they'll tell more and they'll tell more. And that'll slowly lead into maybe the origins of the Jedi, you know, and like, how is this sort of branch breaking off from what they know about the Force and how they believe that the Force is supposed to be handled this way, which in turn would lead to other groups of people being like, no, the Force is supposed to be handled this way. Which is the origins of Sith or other religions, because there's more than just Jedi and Sith. There's all sorts of stuff in the Star Wars world. We learned a lot of that from Rogue One, because they go to Jeddah and like,
well, maybe that's what they're going to introduce. Is they're going to introduce
all these different factions,
a new Force person. In Daisy's movie, and then that's what they're going to go back to explain is like, hey, it's not just Jedi and Sith, it's actually this, and this as well, because Rey has discovered that's the case. But it is, I have to say, a little side note, it is interesting that every time we have these conversations about anything in Star Wars, really, hearing what each one of us thinks about certain quotes and meanings and what's behind that. Because James, you just said that you think The Last Jedi, when Yoda says she has everything she needs, I did not take it as she has everything she needs, the books are in her bag. I took it as she has everything she needs as a person, and who she is, she'll figure it out on her own.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying you're right, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying it's interesting every time we have these conversations that I hear the way each one of us, and any fan really, breaks down quotes and meanings and stuff, because I'm like, oh, I never even considered that, but you're not wrong.
I think most people took it the way you took it, and I'm pulling from what I see on Twitter when people are like, look at this little connection, you know, you have everything you need. And they show that she pushes the drawer and it's got the books, and it's like,
got her binders.
See how genius Rian Johnson is and stuff. And it's
I'll
like,
say this about Yoda. I don't think he would burn the tree if the books were in them. I don't think Yoda is like, I don't think he's like blasphemous like that. So I think he did know that she took them. But he also said, you know, they weren't page turners. They weren't like very good. So that's Yoda saying that. And he's probably read them a few times over the course of 1,000 years. But the thing that introduced
and knows the things that they did that were against what the book said, probably. He's wise to that too. The book says this, but we're not doing that.
The game of telephone, you know, you say one thing and pass it down to a row of 10 people, you're going to get a different sentence. Make that 25,000 years over something that people don't fully understand, there's going to be misinterpretations. So that's what excites me most about Mangold's thing is we're going to get the purest version of what the Force is, because there is no, this is how it is. This is how it is. Someone is going to experience that for the Force first, and we're going to like see it in all of its natural, undogmatically changed ways. And I'm very curious to see what that is, because we talk about the Force all the time. We make jokes about how Lucas made it into this sort of scientific thing. I think they've sort of tried to go away from that a little bit. But Kathleen Kennedy at the same time said this was something George Lucas was talking about doing. So maybe that is a part of it. Maybe this is going to be a life form thing that we see. I don't know. I'm very, very interested to see the fresh like introduction to the natural Force without these, you know, political groups, Jedi, Sith, you know, even the governments, the Senate and stuff, how they think about it, how they feel about it, the stigmas about it, and all that stuff, and seeing people like wielding it and not knowing what to do. And also, we're not getting lightsabers in this for that movie or anything like that. So we'll see like this organic way of how the Force is received and interpreted, and then we'll see how that is hopefully restored with lightsabers and what Rey has in the future. Very interesting.
Do you think people are going to have problems with him determining that and it not being George?
People who don't like Dial of Destiny, sure. But people who no, but
I'm saying in general, like I feel we're at a point, and I don't think it's just now, I think it's been for a while, that Star Wars fans kind of think like, you know, I don't agree with this thing, but it's George's story, it's George's, he came up with it, blah blah blah. Do you think that fans are going to react positively to someone saying this is the early beginning origins to a story that isn't mine?
Segments of fans,
which
yes,
right, which I think James Mangold spoke about that recently because he felt the pressure of, hey, if I took on the story after episode 9, I would feel the pressure of, hey, this is not my story. I'm just building on this thing. But there's also that other side of the coin of, hey, now you're starting super early. So you're determining all those things that have been told are based on what your story is.
Yeah, I think the Filoni factor is huge, even for the dissenting fans. I think he still holds weight in terms of like he still talks to George Lucas. He's the closest embodiment of his teachings, which is very much like a Jedi and a master and apprentice. So I think Filoni, as now a creative executive, and he's also now involved with the movies, I think he'll be a big part of, like, you know, Mangold and whoever winds up being the screenwriter, whether it's Mangold and other people, consulting with someone like a Dave Filoni and these other minds, Leland Chee and all these people who have been around and worked for George Lucas. So I think that will help. Beyond that, if people still have a problem, like just whatever.
I don't know. I guess it's PTSD. I just see it already gonna be
It's always gonna come up. Like, you can make a perfect movie and people are gonna be like, "Oh man, it's not Empire," you know.
There's always people that are like, the only Star Wars movie that exists is Star Wars. I don't even call it A New Hope. It's just Star Wars because that's what it was. But you know, and then you've got people that are like, there's 4, 5, and 6, and then there's people that are like 4, 5, and 6, 1, 2, and 3. You know, it's like you're always gonna have certain segments of fans that have their definition of what is like true canon to them. I mean, even to the extent of things that weren't created by George were created by other creators now, like people that saying Disney canon is not canon because Legends was more canon. And it's like, that stuff wasn't created by George either.
No.
So, you know, there's all sorts of different variations of that. What I do think is interesting, though, is that George said in that public interview with James Cameron, his sort of concept for 7, 8, and 9, and Disney ultimately didn't use it. And he was very open about that, talking about what the Force really was and the metaphysical and all that. And it's interesting now that we have another opportunity for another director to, instead of adapting that as 7, 8, and 9, adapt that as something else. Now he could again create his own thing, and that would be cool, and he has every right to do that, similar to what we've talked about J.J. Abrams and all sorts of things. They want to create their own intellectual property and their own story instead of just stealing what George had in mind. But there is also the possibility that someone like James Mangold would say, how can I do both? Or, you know, or ultimately, like, I will take his concept and write my own characters and write my own story around that idea.
I'll say this right now. Like, if James Mangold is a well-revered filmmaker, I was very hyped when they announced him at Celebration. If I think Star Wars should be lucky that someone like James Mangold, with all the, like Lacey was saying about how fans are and how we've heard about directors like Chris McQuarrie, like saying more or less, why would I want to get involved with that? I'm over here.
He said that to me.
Making billions of dollars. Like,
and then he deleted it. He did delete it.
we have James Mangold, one of the best directors around right now, saying, yeah, I do want to do this. And I think that's something to be proud about as Star Wars fans. Like, this guy wants to
and
be
he's come back because there's been other projects that he's talked about,
right? The Boba Fett or whatever, which would have him doing a Boba Fett movie would have been
killer.
But
he talked about that in the Horowitz interview.
Yeah,
talked about how it was like borderline rated R and how he just didn't think that Lucasfilm was
going
to go for it.
Wanted to do, yeah,
yeah.
But him having the confidence and willing to end Indiana Jones with Harrison Ford makes me believe in his confidence to go back and tell a Star Wars story that takes place, you know, way back when. So I'm very excited about everything that's going on with Mangold being a part of this, because we keep saying, like, who's this director? Even the one, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, I've never heard of her before, and she's doing the next Rey movie. Like,
I heard her from Miss Marvel, but I don't know her work.
Yeah, and I'm rooting for her to knock it out because she has won awards doing documentaries, but she's never done a feature film. So I hope she kills it. I hope she crushes it. But it's also nice to see an established big time director being like, yes, I also want to work on Star Wars. So
yeah, just to wrap up the story, I think, like, I think that this could theoretically be connected. I mean, we don't necessarily even know that the books that she took were like, this is how to be a Jedi. They could be books on like, here's everything we know about the Force. And those books could have been written, you know, in Mangold's story, you know, about what they've learned from this new entity that they've discovered. So you could have that just be a direct correlation where she says, well, I'm going to call myself a Jedi, but I'm going to read these books, see what they're all about. Maybe there's some things in here that we can move forward with. And then we get to like understand that because we go back, see how they got to that point and how they discovered what that is. And that gives us even more confidence in being like, oh, I want to see more of Rey's story because now that I see how it was all discovered and how she's moving forward with it, this is cool. And it's definitely different from the Jedi, even though she's going to call it the Jedi Order, I imagine, because they got to keep that name around.
Well, they keep calling it the New Jedi Order, like every single person that said it. Yeah.
Well, that's it for that story. We're going to move on to the next one here, but I do want to check in real quick. Do we have any super chats by chance?
We do. So thank you to Matt Lawless. Thanks so much for the super chat. He said, hey, PRB, if the Mandoverse is complete with Filoni's movie, what do you think Filoni works on after? New series, maybe, but in what era? Second movie. So this is actually good because we're going to get into this Mando season 3 next as the story in Resistance Report. But I'm going to start with you, John. John, do you think what happens after the Mandoverse completes?
I think I don't know that like something
which
like
is years from now, by the way. He said it was like 6-7 years out.
It really depends on if something like the Ghost Crew and Ahsoka story ends with the Mandoverse, because if not, he can tell more stories with them, and then he'd want to stay and do that. But being that he's taking on a movie, I think he'd stay in that realm, and also being that he's now a creative executive, he has a lot more responsibilities in terms of overseeing story decisions, and like I was just saying, like how, you know, the Force is interpreted and stuff. So he's gonna now have sort of the pod race announcers, 2 heads, where he's got his one Dave Filoni head where he's like handling sort of the lore and how we do this stuff in terms of making the stories, and then he's going to be still creating stuff. So I'd like to think that if his movie is a success, that Mandoverse movie, people love it, it makes money, he'll stay right there and make another movie in some capacity.
James?
Yeah, I think it's kind of tricky because I want Star Wars to be able to be told by multiple directors. And I know, like, say, J.J. Abrams did 2 movies, you know, or whatever. But I don't want it to be like, well, Filoni's sticking around with Lucasfilm forever and he's elevated to the level where he does movies. So all he does now is movies. So it's like every 5 years we get another Filoni movie. That feels a little strange for me. And I think you're right. He's got to do the 2-head thing. My initial thought on this is if Mando and all that he's created there ends, I think he just goes somewhere else. He's like, we're going to tell a story in James Mangold's world, you know, and it's a new television show or that could lead up to another movie or something. But like, as someone who can be on set as a director, as technically an actor, as a producer, as a writer, you know, all of this, he's wearing many hats, pun intended. And I think
or not apparent
or
galleries,
not. Yeah. So I think that to say that he's just always going to be a director is a little short-sighted on his career. I think he has so much more to produce, and I don't see this going that direction, but he also could at some point be like, I'm done with Star Wars. I've done everything I can with Star Wars, even to the point where I've directed movies now. I could lead other franchises. I could create my own worlds and things. I'm just saying, like, the guy's young and he's already in the position now where he's so creative over multiple things: animation, live action, film, you know, it's like actual in theater movies. It's like, I don't know at what point the guy says, I want to do something else that isn't Star Wars, because my career could be even bigger than this.
Right.
But who knows?
Yeah, it's tricky because he's one of those people that you never want to see leave Lucasfilm, like Doug Chiang.
Right.
You know, you're like, he's so important to everything that's happening there. And like, he's the one that's kind of keeping the legacy strong with what George had wanted. And he brings it up all the time. Like, oh, George would want this. We'll get to it in a second with the gallery thing. But I honestly don't know what's going to come after that. I think you guys made some good points, John. You're totally right. I think Ghost Crew kind of determined like is that story done, or is he going to keep going with something else? But I think he's going to be at Lucasfilm for a while.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, that's all we got for now. Thanks, Matt.
Well, cool. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the Disney Gallery Mandalorian season 3 episode. Now they for season 1 they dropped multiple episodes. For season 2 they dropped 1, and they did everything except for like the stuff we wanted to see at the end of the season, and they saved that for later, dropped another episode. To me, it looks like they just did one and done for this season. This was Mandalorian season 3's gallery behind the scenes. This is a look at our season with the directors, with some of the stunt coordinators, with the actors. And it was what it was. I saw you guys kind of talking back and forth about some people kind of panning this, and we all seemed to watch it, if I'm not mistaken, and thought, yeah, that was fine. Well, what was the big deal with that? But I'll start with you, Lacey, on this one. What were your thoughts on the third? Well, I don't want to say the third gallery, but like the third season of gallery for Mandalorian.
For Mando, yeah, because they had a Book of Boba Fett one, right? They did.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And then they had,
and that was one and done as well.
Yeah, and then season 2 of Mando, they had 2 separate gallery parts because they had the gallery and then they had the Luke Skywalker one that they were saving. I thought this one was good. I had fun watching it. It was one of those ones that I left smiling. Like, it was an enjoyable hour of my time. I know John had mentioned that he had seen some people online kind of being like, I don't know how I feel about it, or like, it wasn't that great. And people have their critiques about it. I think it's different than it was probably season 1 of Mando. It's like the whole format has changed. And I'm going to be completely honest. This is going to sound absolutely terrible, but it's true. I left it being like, wow, that was really great. I really enjoyed it. And John was like, is it weird that Pedro's not in it? And I was like, and I had a moment where I literally was like, oh my God, he's not in it. And I didn't even notice, guys. I didn't even notice he wasn't in it. And I know how bad that sounds, but it was so true. I didn't notice that he wasn't in it just because, it's so quick paced. They're cutting between sound bites and you're listening to what the people are saying. And there's so many good quotes throughout the whole gallery. But yeah, I was like genuinely shocked with myself that I didn't realize. And I was like, oh my God, you're totally right. And that is weird. I will say that is weird.
Oh yeah.
That he's not in it.
I don't think it's that weird.
Oh.
We'll get in.
Well, because in Mando season 1, there was some spots where he was on camera. Obviously, when he takes the helmet off at the end and IG-11 helps him with the Bacta and stuff. But generally speaking, that was a voiceover thing. And they had been honest about that he wasn't in as much as they'd like him to be, maybe season 2.
I don't think they were as honest as they should have been, probably, because I think
that's fair.
They have built something up where a lot of people are really under the assumption that he's the guy who's always there. He's the lead, and they're surprised that he's not taking off the helmet more. And I think we've been sort of under the impression that we've known that for a while now. They're being a little bit more honest about it now, and I think they're trying to back that down from being like, and your lead, the Mandalorian, this big thing to usher him out.
Still, they showed him doing the
voice,
voiceovers.
Basically.
I know, but they still showed him behind the scenes doing the voiceovers, like him holding the pillow and like talking about the process.
That's fair.
So I feel like it's weird in that sense because they could have.
I just think they're trying to dial it back. Yeah.
And I get that. And I appreciate them taking the time to like really spotlight the stunt performers this time, which I had said weeks ago. Like, I really hope they give them that moment.
That was cool.
That was really cool. I loved how they focused a lot on the creature performers and the droid people that like built all the droids and they had the droid bar. But I mean, I guess I could have taken out the Lizzo Jack Black segment and put in Pedro, and I probably would have enjoyed it more. Not because I don't think Lizzo and Jack Black are great, because I like both of them equally, but I think it's weird to have all this behind the scenes footage of Jack Black and then have none of Pedro, who is the Mandalorian. And I enjoyed those segments, but it's just weird to me that you're going to have, or like Bryce Dallas Howard is in it a bunch. And I love her. I love everything she says. I love her enthusiasm. I love everything she adds to the show. But she only did one episode and they had her talking about the entire season the whole time, but then nothing from the guy that's playing the character. So again, complete honesty, I didn't notice. and I enjoyed it, and I would watch it again. I did. But it is weird that he's not in it. But I did enjoy probably the most, outside of obviously the Anzellans, which were perfect, and like Grogu puppets and stuff like that, which is my favorite part. I thoroughly enjoyed the quotes from John, Dave, and Rick. I think the three of them just get it. You know, they're so passionate about this project. They understand these characters, but they also are willing to be vulnerable about that the characters aren't 100% figured out. Like, they're openly telling you, hey, we didn't know where it was going to end up, but we learned along the way that, hey, this is actually where we want to go. And they did give a shout out to the guy Noah that does some of the writing as well, which was interesting because you've never really seen him, but then you saw him in this behind the scenes footage. But to me, that was my favorite part, is hearing them be open and honest about the process, that it's not set in stone. It is constantly changing. It is something that we're learning along the way of what we want to tell. Because I think, honestly, critics and fans alike have been, especially with this past season, really critical of where the story has gone and really critical of like the characters. But Jon Favreau says in this hour episode very clearly, hey, in a movie, you have to have that payoff by the third act. In TV, you can have that payoff years down the line and it will be worth it. And it's gratifying. So to me, when people are like, why didn't this happen? Where is this going? Why didn't they answer this question? You have Jon Favreau straight up telling you, like, it's not coming for a couple of years. Like, pause, pump the brakes.
It happens in the season too, when we're like, episode 3 sucked because they didn't resolve what happened in 2 yet. And it's like, we're not even through the season.
Right. But I did like how they said that, you know, the whole Bo-Katan thing, like, that was something that happened organically, but then they realized, hey, we have more story to tell here. So then Katie got more time. Or like the Axe Wove stuff where they're like, we were going to get rid of him, but we really liked him and we liked that character. So we kept him. I'm totally cool with the story changing, and I don't think it has to be a set in stone thing. And I think people have to be more open to enjoying the ride instead of being so focused on the payoff and gratification of like what's coming at the end.
Yeah. Or what they thought was coming at the end.
Right, or assuming or expectations. I did like Dave Filoni. First of all, he didn't wear his hat. Did notice that. He's not been wearing his hat lately. I think he's moved on from the hat. I think he's like, I'm past the hat.
It's corporate
also, not even that. They all had
Just
amazing. They all had amazing sweatshirts on during this gallery series. Like, I wanted all of their sweatshirts. Jon Favreau had this like maroon kind of like bounty hunter one on, and then one of them had I believe it was the guy that did the droid builds. He had one from Boba Fett, and they all had very similar hoodies. Like, you could tell they're all like, and I was like, can I just have all the hoodies in this?
They don't like buy fan hoodies or merch.
No,
they
those
like
are crew.
Have their
Those are
ideas and they like make their own merch. And it's like, that's what
I was
makes it
so
cool and
jealous. There's
exclusive.
like, if you go
like
back,
a yellow
Make
Make Solo 2 Happen hoodie, you know?
Yeah, there's a clip of the three of them talking with the droid guy, and they all have these amazing hoodies on, and you're like, ah. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so Dave Filoni was just the way he talked about it being hopeful, per usual. I really appreciated, but the thing that made me think, which I often as a fan push back on, is he said, you know, there are moments when Star Wars can be funny and happy and joyful, but then there are times that it's okay for it to be dark and serious. And I was just like, okay, you got me, Dave, because I'm the first person to criticize, like, why is it so serious? And he's like, because at the end, you're going to get picked back up again. And I was just like, okay, you got me, Dave. So I think I have to be more willing to understand that sometimes the story does get dark, but it's because you want the payoff at the end that it's going to be happy. And with the ending of Mando kind of sitting at the house and like, what comes next? They did that on purpose. And I like that they brought that up and mentioned it, that they were like, just because this adventure is ending doesn't mean that's it. It's just, we needed this story to end here.
Yeah. Or it's not the beginning of the next adventure. I definitely liked, well, it's not that I liked, but I noticed that at one point Rick says that in a lot of ways, the title more so applies to Bo-Katan in this particular season. And that's sort of like a fan speculated thing that we've come up with, where it's like, oh, who is the Mandalorian? Who is it referring to? What if this whole time it's been about Bo and all this other stuff? And I think that proves to me that the creators see it as the perfect title, because it can mean whatever they want it to mean for that particular season. And to me, hearing Rick say that, and the way that this was sort of showcased with Pedro not being in it, and seeing a lot of Katie Sackhoff giving her point of view on the season, makes it seem like they thought of this season as her season. Now, that doesn't necessarily say what season 4 is going to be about. And I think that truthfully, honestly, it will always have him being a part of it. Sort of, I think or at least I've compared it to Ezra, where like that 3rd season was really about Sabine and Ezra took a back seat, but the show didn't become about Sabine. It's always been about Ezra. But in order to flesh out those characters, you have to have seasons where it can't just be Ezra always having issues. He has
but
to
Rick
sometimes
did say that Katie
confident.
was the Mandalorian this season. Rick
No,
does say that.
Well, he says in a lot of ways you could see it that way. I don't think he like straight up confirms that, you know,
right.
that's exactly. But what I'm saying is, I think that confirms for me that that's probably how they saw it, or they wanted to loosely take it in that direction, which sort of proves a fan theory of like, that name doesn't always necessarily mean Din Djarin. It can mean whatever they want it to mean in this season.
Right.
And so I thought that was interesting. And I think that is sort of on display here with no Pedro and Katie Sackhoff being what, you know, they've got her centered, you know, in the seat. Like, this is your season. Talk about it. I don't know, John, what were your takeaways from all of this?
It was definitely bizarre that Pedro wasn't in it at all.
I still can't believe I didn't notice. I feel like such a bad fan.
Well, I mean, and that's telling in itself though, too. But in terms of like you couldn't have like done an interview with him while he's filming another show for a few minutes just to say like anything. Like I mean, he is the star of the show, even though there's narrative shifts and stuff. He's still the star of the show. It'd be like doing a behind the scenes of The Sopranos, and like James Gandolfini's not in it, but a guy who plays a deli owner is interviewed about his scenes. It's just like, it is strange, but at the same time, we could not get any of these things. So the things that we did get, I enjoyed. And my takeaways, Giancarlo Esposito being very direct about how he wants his character to be portrayed. He's like, he was almost like directing his scene when he's talking with the Shadow Council, and he's like, oh, let's do it this way. If I turn this way, let's do it like that. And I'm like, oh wow, he's actively directing himself while acting. I thought that was very cool, because it shows how much he's vested and interested. He's not just like, where's my mark? All right, so you know,
what do you want me to do, and I'll do it. It's more like,
exactly.
He was able to say like, this is what I see. Do you agree? And they're like, yeah. You know,
I was looking for mustaches with him after James made that comment about clones and mustaches. I was looking at all the clips being
I pulled that from the internet.
I was like, is he wearing he has a mustache? He doesn't have a mustache there. He's doing the interview without a mustache. I was literally looking, guys.
Yeah. I obviously didn't love how much time they spent with Lizzo and Jack Black. And although, I mean, it's funny seeing Jack Black do his
they admitted why they did it. Social media. They literally admitted in the show.
No, right. But I mean, in the documentary, like, you know, Jack Black doing his little Tenacious D singing version of the Mando theme was funny. But other takeaways, I do like that they gave a bit of a spotlight to Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder. I thought that was very cool, so people can understand, oh, this guy does this and this guy does this. So I thought that was awesome. Seeing more of the crew, because, you know, fans fawn over seeing IG-12 with Baby Yoda or Grogu with the squeezing the fruit, and then you realize it's, you know, Steve or Dennis were operating that machine.
4 dudes.
And and he gets an opportunity to talk about it. Yeah,
and then 3 guys said they were doing basically like head hands. That's bananas.
Yeah. And then another thing that I pay very close attention to Jon Favreau when he speaks because he has this very casual nature about him when he talks, but I think he is very good at sending direct messages in a metaphoric sort of way. And what stood out to me was him talking about the mythosaur. And he knows what's going on. He knows that there's some OG fans who criticize the evolution of the story, or, you know, what's happening with this. I can't believe you're bringing Clone Wars into your story. And he goes, yeah, the mythosaur, that just started as a symbol on Boba Fett's armor.
Yeah, he has to bring it down to baseline. Yeah.
And it became something else. And he's like, it's like Mr. Rogers explaining to you colors. And he's like waiting, he's pausing so people can be like, oh yeah. And I love, he does that in a way to tell people like, this has been happening forever. And he does it in a very non-combative, like gentle but clear way. So I always, and I advise people, always pay attention to Jon Favreau when he speaks. He's very smart. He's obviously a great storyteller, and he's very deliberate, even sometimes when it seems casual. Maybe not, you know, if he's making a sandwich on a TV show, maybe not so much, but he's serious about that sandwich. But the other thing, the Phil Tippett stuff, the fact that Jon Favreau is like, we got to get this guy. This is the guy who did the Rancor, and he's like nerding out. He's like, this guy did this, and he's the aesthetic of Star Wars, and we made it all dirty and grimy. And the fact that they got the legend, Phil Tippett, to be involved for someone who seems a bit like, I'm all set with Star Wars. Like when he does Q&As and stuff, he's like, ask me anything but not Star Wars, you know? They got him in, and that just shows the fans that these guys are, but at the same time respecting, you know, the OGs who made them as the creators fall in love with the franchise in the first place. You know, you picture Jon Favreau as, you know, a 14-year-old or whatever, like having the Rancor like on his shelf in his bedroom or something. And they got the guy who made it to come back and do some stuff for this show. And I think that's really special. And overall, I just think this show is treated with a lot of care. I liked Dave Filoni joking about how Favreau's like, yeah, we got to do a Baby Yoda. And he's like, what do you mean we got to do a Baby Yoda?
Oh yeah, that made me laugh when he was like, I have to talk to George.
Yeah, he's like, that's a really bad idea. That's George's favorite character.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, it'll be fine. We're gonna do that. And you know, I just love how Filoni was like the nervous, like when your brother breaks something, and he's like, well, when Dad gets home, like, oh, this is gonna be bad. I love that
that was a good moment where he's just like, that's George's favorite. I was like, no. I have to be there for this.
I was picturing Dave Filoni being like, an opportunity to work with Jon Favreau on a live action show. Yeah, I'll take that. And then like day one, Jon Favreau walking in like, we're bringing Jar Jar back, you know, whatever. And he's like, I don't know about this.
I did love that on the best part. Yeah, I did love that on the best part.
That was cool for sure.
I didn't feel like we learned anything more than we didn't already know, but because they had already kind of talked a lot about his return and why it was important before. You know,
yeah, the importance of that in this behind the scenes gallery is if you have people like, maybe there's people who still, you know, hate Jar Jar and they can't let that go, and you know, whatever, that's their prerogative, that's their opinion. If you hear other people that you do respect talking about this guy's an actor and a performer, it helps people separate him further from just that character. So you could say like, I didn't like Jar Jar. This Ahmed Best guy is unbelievably talented. And I hear Jon Favreau saying this. I hear Dave Filoni saying this. Like, I hear Carl Weathers saying this. Like, there's something to this. That's like, now I can see. And that goes back to me, you know, with Favreau. Like, he is very good at not convincing people of things, but telling people how he truly feels about them without trying to force it on you, while still delivering the message very succinctly and directly. And I really admire that. But my last point is, I don't think we need 7 episodes of this. I think that was just enough to get an idea of how they made this. And again, they could have not done it. So I'm glad that we got it, because we did get a little behind the scenes. Like, it's not Empire
and we haven't gotten
of Dreams.
Andor. We haven't gotten anything for Andor. So
right. And it's not Empire of Dreams. It's not even Light and Magic, but it's a nice little extra thing so that we can talk about it and maybe understand some choices that were made. Would I have liked them to explain what happened with Tamara Morrison? Yep. Would I have liked to have seen Pedro? Of course. And
they did gloss over the return of how Mando and Grogu were together again. They gloss over that.
Yeah.
Really quick. But I did love how two things, and then one thing that shocked me. Two things. One, how they said that Dave Filoni had said, and I think it was Carl Weathers and Rick as well had chimed in, that Jon Favreau picks the best moments to have Grogu be the star. Like the moments that they focus on Grogu are important because it brings back the audience to this is an innocent child that has compassion and love and wants to support everybody and is trying to do the right thing. Because I think a lot of criticisms we got for season 2 and 3 is like people were like too much Grogu, too much Baby Yoda. And here's Jon Favreau being like, no, there's plenty. And I picked it and I want it there.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Really quick to stem off of that is when he mentions that, it was in correlation to something else that I was going to mention that I liked about this. And that was the fact that they addressed that they have this show with the character who's wearing a helmet the entire time. And how that was like a big question mark. And Jon Favreau being like, no, man, the spirit of Star Wars is there because like you had Darth Vader wear this helmet for 3 movies. And did that diminish his character? Was he not able to mode what needed to be on screen to make that character who he was and have all that? So as someone who has sort of been on the stance of like, it's not that I'm not a Pedro fan. It's just, I don't feel like we need to see the character. And I like the idea that we have a character who doesn't remove his helmet. I'm cool with that. It was nice to see them address that. And because of that, in turn, your point, Jon Favreau says, that's why we need Grogu. We have a character that doesn't have his helmet on. So the human connection is made through this other character. And this is why when we get A, we need B to come in there and sort of make it human and make it real again. That character is very important.
The other thing that stuck out to me was basically the whole segment about Carl Weathers and how he works and how he loves being a part of the crew and how it means so much to him. And the one thing that stuck out to me was when he was like, every day I come to work and I go, what am I going to learn today? Like, who am I going to learn from? Because I feel like that's such a genuine message to everyone to like take a step back sometimes and just look at life in a general sense of like taking something good out of everything. And I really liked that because oftentimes,
it's right, and to learn.
It's never too late for anything. And I think oftentimes we've been kind of trained to think after a certain point, you have nothing else to give, or like you're in your old set ways and there's nothing you can change to get to what your dreams are and your aspirations are. And he's telling you like, no, here I am doing it every day. And every day I'm learning something new and I'm constantly evolving and changing. Loved that. And then the one thing that shocked me, Gorian Shard is practical.
Yeah, we knew that. We told you that.
I know. I didn't think he was practical.
I forgot. Yeah.
And when I saw it, I was like, because I remember we had a discussion about it months ago where I was like, is he though? It looks kind of CG. He's practical. Really caught me off guard.
And that was one of the things that I liked about the character. I was like, I can't believe they pulled it off. That I'm a big guy and my mouth is moving, and the way it all worked together. I was like, that's freaking cool. And then your response was like, I think he's kind of CG. And I was like, I think you should go back and take a look because you'll probably appreciate him a little bit more when you see.
Yeah, I still don't like that character, but
I mean, that's fair. But like, you could probably respect the art of how they do the puppetry and everything. Yeah. So
they didn't talk about Zeb. People are chatting in the chat right now. They didn't mention Zeb at all. The process of Zeb, how they did Zeb,
and how this maybe connects to future things.
Michelle made a good point. She goes, maybe it'll be in the Ahsoka behind the scenes. I'm like, yeah, probably.
Yeah, some of these characters have been evolving and we've been seeing them. Like, he was wearing an Ahsoka sweatshirt too. Filoni, I noticed. Like, he was wearing his Ahsoka crew stuff.
Shocker.
Kind of cool. I know, but I'm just saying it wasn't Mando.
You go into his closet, it's just all that. That's the one thing that's in his closet. Like Doug on same outfit.
All right, well, we got one last story to talk about before we're going to move into the Resistance transmission. So stick around for those because they are fun this week. But one other story is that, speaking of Ahsoka, they have alluded to that there's going to be more Ahsoka footage possibly coming this weekend as part of 2023's Essence Festival of Culture in New Orleans. That was part of the WaltDisney.com, the Disney Corporation, putting out that press release about what's coming up. So things that you need to look forward to. So I don't think there's a whole lot we can talk about. John, do you have any thoughts on the possibility of an Ahsoka trailer coming this weekend potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's always I don't know much about this.
You ever seen Girls Trip?
Girls Trip.
Because this is where they go on Girls Trip, the movie Girls Trip.
Oh, I have bought it. I just haven't watched it yet.
It's so good. It's so funny.
Sitting right next to Fallen Order.
Right next
And
to
Tron
it,
Legacy.
Yeah.
And Tron 3. I have an early copy of Tron 3 I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
So the special I have a lot of Troning to do. The special look at Ahsoka, that would make sense because we're entering July. We're, 6-7 weeks away from Ahsoka, and I think we're a few months removed from, the celebration and that trailer. I think it would make sense to get
D23's
something.
coming.
Yeah. So I don't know how they operate with this in terms of like, is this going to be one of those things where only people who are there see it, like we've seen happen with Obi-Wan in the past? But I think it would make a lot of sense, and I think it would be cool because if you're able to have a clip, and they already do, it would be shooting themselves in the foot to not make that presentable to the public, especially with what's going on with Disney and Disney Plus. Like, you want to get people to watch your shows, and I think if they have footage, get it out there for people to see, so people can talk about it. Maybe put something, an extra thing in there to make people go like, oh, like that, so you get the online buzz. I think we will get something. I don't know if it's when this drops, but maybe next week after we hear rumblings about it from people tweeting about being at this thing. They'll put something out that's similar to it, but maybe a little different, so that the people that were there can be like Celebration, be like, I saw.
Right.
Or they'll put it out Monday, Good Morning America. After
I
they
saw
played
Thrawn's
it
eyeballs, like we did at Celebration.
Yeah.
They're red. So I think we'll see something. Hopefully, yeah.
All right, Lacey, any thoughts on that, or should we move on? I don't really have anything.
I don't really have any thoughts, but if you haven't seen Girls Trip, you should go watch it. It's really hilarious.
Is it the sequel to Road Trip?
No, it's got Regina, I think her name is. She's
Regina
like the main.
George?
No, from Scary Movie. She's like the character that goes to like the movie theater with like chicken.
Oh, if
I
it was
forget her
Regina
name.
George, it would be Mean Girls Trip. I'm sorry, that's my mistake.
You're the worst. Okay, it's super funny though. Definitely go watch it. It's pretty.
Oh, Regina Hall. Yeah.
Regina Hall. Thank you.
All right. Well, if it's where I can watch it without paying for it, I will see it.
Didn't you say you own it?
Yeah, you said you own
You think I actually bought that movie?
You said you bought it.
You said you bought it, so we're just taking you for your word. You're like, I own it, but I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, I own
was like,
Girls
all
Trip
right.
on VHS.
It's a great movie. So it's
A
not
great movie?
VHS. It just came out like 5 years ago.
It's a great movie?
Yes, it's hilarious.
All right.
It's a good movie. A great movie.
Oh, it has 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. A 6.9er
John
on...
assumes that I have terrible taste in movies, but what he doesn't know is I don't.
You do have some bad taste in movies. Let's be honest.
I don't.
All that Hallmark nonsense we keep talking about.
You can like things and still have a good taste in movies.
Resistance transmission. No. Do you want to go to it?
Do you want me to go? Okay.
All right.
All right, guys. It's time for resistance transmissions. All right. So for those of you just chiming in or joining, resistance transmissions is where John puts up a crazy, wacky situation on Twitter and you guys give your answers. And I don't know what the scenario is. I don't know what the scenario is, but I have seen what the photo is because John shared it in our group chat like a fool. But I don't know what you guys answered. So we go in this fresh. All right. So the situation is caption this photo.
I'll pull it up right here.
Yep. Of a smiling Harrison Ford and George Lucas from the Indiana Jones premiere. And Harrison is pointing at George very happily, and George looks miserable. Which I think George is just chilling. Like, I think that's just his resting face, and people assume.
I don't think he smiles in photos very often.
No, because someone else posted, I forgot who it was, posted a bunch of photos of George with people, and everyone was like, "It's George!" And every picture George is like this. So I just think that's just him. So
yeah,
if you were
that's
George,
a great picture,
right.
though, because it's like Harrison Ford is like the fan. Yeah, it's like, it's sweet. It's a sweet photo for our audio listeners. you know, if you want to check in the YouTube version just to see the photo, or you may have seen the photo, but it's cool.
I do think that part of this, though, there's an underlying mockery from Harrison Ford that he probably knows George hates this. So he's like, it's this guy. And George is like, come on, Harrison. Because like Harrison knows George doesn't like this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So Harrison's poking fun at it.
By the
That's how
way,
I took the photo.
Have you noticed that Harrison Ford seems to be way more like it's hitting him now than he used to be? Like he's been welling up in some interviews and like being more earnest and serious about his feelings and stuff. But he's also still being funny, but it's like he's not doing the
I think it's
care
Indiana
stuff.
Jones. I think it's
Yeah,
Indiana
but
Jones.
he's still like,
is.
even when people talk about like thanks for everything, he's like really getting emotional about it. But I do love the clip that was going around where someone was like, if you had the dial, where would you go? And he goes, home.
Oh yeah, I sent that. I
And he
posted
just
that.
stares at the guy for a second, and the
It
guy
was
doesn't react. So
IGN.
he goes,
Yeah.
I haven't been home for a long time.
He's
that
on his
literally
victory lap.
that sums up my sense of humor. That clip of him being like home and then
And he just
holding
stops.
holding it the whole time, and the guy's just like, because you know that like the guy's sitting there like, so then
Yeah.
he picks up on the nervous, and he's just like, I haven't been home in a while, like because
He was
you know
hoping the guy would laugh. The guy was like, oh.
the guy did not laugh. Sorry, go ahead, James.
I was just that I'm trying to think of the order here, but he's revisited Han Solo and said goodbye to that character. He revisited Blade Runner and said goodbye to that character. And like in all these roles, he's playing like, oh, my character when I was so young has now grown old and see what I've become. And now he's returning to Indiana Jones. It's like even if I think you're right. It's the fact that it's Indiana Jones. I think there's also part of that that's like, I've been doing a lot of these movies lately, and this is really where
Sad
I'm
for me.
at in my life, like
Yeah.
I'm not the younger version anymore. I am the older person, and I'm borderline on the end of retiring and not being able to be in these movies anymore. So I think I don't know. It's just, this might have been one of the more active movies at his age that he's been in. And it could have hit him a little bit more real that like, man, I pulled off Blade Runner, still got it. But like Indiana Jones, like that was tough. I made it happen, but like it might have been tough on him.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so, I don't know.
Yeah, it's also important to remember, I think I said this last time, is like, I think he only did Force Awakens because they said they'd do another Indiana Jones with him. Like that was the agreement. So clearly Indiana Jones means more to him than probably any role for him. So this is like saying goodbye to that character. Is like, it's different than when you say goodbye, but you don't know what comes next. Or he thought he was saying goodbye last time, and now this time he's back again. It's like kind of bittersweet. But anyway, that being said, that's the situation. So first up is Lonely Banshee at Imer Wild, who said, look alive, George. Okay, close enough.
Look alive, George.
Oh, look alive, George.
Look
Right.
alive, George.
Look alive, George. I slaughtered that Lonely Banshee, and I'm so sorry. But yeah, look alive. Yeah. You know what's sad though? I did see a video of George getting like pushed into some venue recently with paparazzi and fans, and he was looking very lost. And I felt bad. The security guard was like fighting people out of the way. People need to be more
trip on the carpet.
People need to be more gracious with celebrities in general and like people that have a following, because I feel like we saw it with Mark Hamill a month ago or so when they hit him in the face. Like, chill out. Let's calm down.
Agreed.
Human beings. All right. Next is Gary24fan at Gary24fan. What up, Gary? He said, and this guy thought I knew how to install an Office door.
Only knew.
Famously, only knew. I am on a roll tonight. And this guy thought I only knew how to install an Office door. That's true. Harrison was a carpenter. Fun fact. Sean Santarude at Rude Cold. How rude, Sean. He said, Harrison, make Solo 2 happen. George, nope. I'm kind of
I think it'd be the other way around.
I don't think so. True. Harrison was all about Alden.
Yeah, he liked Alden, but Solo was George Lucas's idea. That's probably the only Star Wars movie he likes since he sold it.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Actually, we won't see because we'll probably never get the answer.
We'll never know.
Aaron Gould at I am Aaron Gould. What up, Aaron? Said this guy is so wasted. Heh. I may be wasted a little as well. Want to get some nachos, George? I'd love some nachos right now. You guys were there. Was Harrison hammered?
He was not hammered, but the dude can cut a rug. I saw him dancing.
Nice.
He had a definite, like, he was Harrison as he moved around, but every once in a while he would come alive and do something funny and quirky, and then like would sort of return back to his self. But it was strange to see him. I mean, this picture is evidence. Like, he would look like Harrison Ford and then be like, George Lucas, and then just sort of like,
I'm telling you, I think he made fun of George in this photo, and now no one knows it.
Busting his chops. Yeah, so we got to see him just sort of hanging out with his friends, and there weren't cameras around, and there weren't like paparazzi, and there weren't interviews, and he was just like making his friends laugh. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Those are kind of the nice moments when there's nobody around. RMD Collective at RMD COLLCTVE said, boy, if you don't get your finger out of my goddamn face. Very aggressive. All right, next is Daniel. What up, Daniel? Alvarado. Ooh, Alvarado. Love that name. At DeBerries too. Han about George. He shot first. It's true. McClunky. And then Chris at Chris Brettel said top men.
Nice.
Top men.
And we do have a super chat that just popped in, so I'm going to read that at the end. First of all, thank you everybody for your answers. If you want to be part of the Resistance Transmissions, make sure to follow us on Twitter and or all social media channels at TRB Podcast. We're on everything now: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all of those.
Yeah.
So we do have a super chat. So Andrew Staley, what up, Andrew? How's it going, man? Missed you, bud. He said just got home from Indy 5. Loved it. Have a good weekend. Thanks.
Andrew knows now.
All right, buddy.
Knows what? What does he know?
He knows like the plot.
He's seen
like
it.
when you're out and then you're in,
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Happy for you, Andrew. Andrew, you're the best. All right. And before we go, I do want to say Happy Canada Day to all our neighbors in Canada.
Happy Canada Day.
Which is Saturday.
All right. Happy
Back to
early
you, Jeff.
Canada Day. Is it called Canada Day? That's what it's called?
It is Canada Day. Yep.
Wow. What a clever name.
I run social for some Canadian channels.
Nice. All right. Yeah, thank you to everybody for listening and watching and being a part of TRB. It means the world to us. We hope you're enjoying the podcast as we march closer to Ahsoka and have reviewed Indy and talking about all the upcoming movies. But it's really all about having a good time talking Star Wars, and the three of us do that. And we wouldn't have as much fun without all of you being a part of the TRB community. So thank you. And spread the word. If you know people who like Star Wars, tell them about the Resistance broadcast. All they have to do is look us up on a podcast app, and there we are. And of course, our YouTube channel. But a special thank you to our patrons at patreon.com/resistance broadcast. I brought it up at the top. That's another great way to support what we do. And also, you get access, depending on what tier you join, to our Discord server, extra bonus episodes. If you are a patron right now, we're going to be heading very shortly, immediately actually, to our live Q&A on Patreon. So hop over there if you're not tired of us. But a special thank you to our generals and spice runners on Patreon: Carmelo, John RISI, Jetta Rosewater, Frank Grande, Darth Hurricane, Nick Kratz, Chris Morales, Brian Smith, Matt Chitty, Danny, Mike Rumore, Matt Heath, Brendan McLaughlin, Count Pepto, Sneaky Zebra, Aaron Ellington, who's going to be up on the pod race on Monday, Micah Harrison, Colin Cormier, Jolt and Jetta DiMaggio, and Diana. And our spice runners: David Probus, Neil Shaw, Kendall Gelner, Dave Hornack, Thomas Hennessy, Andrew Staley, Jeremy Myers, Michael Fry, and the Fort Worthian. Thank you all, and all of our patrons, and everyone who just enjoys what we do here at TRB. You can find me on Twitter at Johnny Hoey, and talking about non-Star Wars movies on my movie pod, Just Like the Movies. James?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, both at Myra Trunks.
And Lacey?
People can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Lacey Gilleran, and on TikTok at It's Lacey Gilleran. And then coming up sometime this week, can't give you a definite day now, but sometime this week, I am reading Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade.
Oh,
by
yeah.
Delilah Dawson, and I will be doing a review for that here on the YouTube channel, and probably giving some type of update on the episode about what I thought. But
Yeah,
so far, it is interessante. So I'll tell you
All
that.
right. And yeah, so tomorrow, Friday, this episode will hit podcast feeds, and then our spoiler review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny around 1 o'clock East on the YouTube channel and podcast apps as well. And of course, another episode Monday morning. So subscribe and make sure you're caught up. But also, everyone just have a wonderful weekend. We hope you're doing well, and we'll see you next time right here on TRB. We'll see you around, kids.